Indiana entered the final week of May sitting at 4 wins and 4 losses, a record that, on paper, still left room for optimism. The season was young, the roster had talent, and Caitlin Clark, now in her 3rd professional season after missing most of 2025 to injury, was back on the floor and healthy. On the night of May 30th, the Fever traveled to Portland to face the expansion Fire. A franchise less than a season old, built largely from players the rest of the league had passed over in the draft. By every conventional measure, this was a game Indiana was expected to win. They lost by 16 points. The final score was 100-84. Portland's Megan Gustafson led all scorers with 22 points, while Carla Leidy added 18 points and 12 assists, and Emily Engsler recorded 16 points and 10 rebounds. 2 players achieving double-doubles in the same game for the first time in the expansion franchise's brief history. The Fever, by contrast, were disjointed from nearly the opening possession of the second quarter onward, and the box score told only part of the story. CBS Sports' Aaliyah Boston led Indiana with 18 points and 7 rebounds. Kelsey Mitchell added 17 points. Those 2 performances kept the final margin from appearing even more lopsided. But the question everyone was asking by the end of the night wasn't about Boston or Mitchell. It was about Clark, specifically how the coaching staff had chosen to use her, when they had chosen to use her, and what the strategic rationale was for a series of decisions that, taken together, produced one of the more confounding performances management decisions of the young season. CBS Sports Bleacher Report Clark played 22 minutes, going 1 for 7 from the field, just the 7th single-digit scoring game of her career, and her first since June 24, 2025. She shot 0 for 2 from 3-point range, went 4 for 5 from the foul line, and finished with 6 assists, 2 rebounds, and a steal. The assist number deserves attention. Clark, in limited minutes and under constant foul pressure, was still doing the work of a primary distributor. Her shot wasn't falling, but she was creating for teammates who, for reasons that will be examined in detail here, were not converting. ESPN Bleacher Report the game began in a manner that suggested Indiana was prepared. The offense moved efficiently in the opening minutes. Ball movement was fluid. Clark was directing traffic, finding cutters, and getting teammates into high-percentage positions. Indiana fell into an early 6-point deficit before Clark and Aaliyah Boston combined to erase it and build a lead. The Fever jumped out front. The building in Portland was restless, and for a short stretch, it looked as though Indiana had the composure to manage a road game against an inferior opponent. Bleacher Report then, the substitutions began. With 6:30 remaining in the first quarter, head coach Stephanie White removed Clark, Lexi Hull, and Aaliyah Boston from the floor simultaneously. Indiana was leading at that point. The move wasn't dictated by foul trouble. Clark had not yet accumulated the fouls that would later define her night. The substitution, by White's own postgame account, was described as routine workload management. Standard roster rotation, nothing unusual. Bleacher Report by the end of the first quarter, Portland led 29-15. Bleacher Report the 14-point swing in the span of roughly 6.5 minutes is not a coincidence to be dismissed with a reference to standard rotation philosophy. When a team's primary ball handler, its most efficient scorer, and its most experienced front-court player are all removed simultaneously during a stretch of competitive basketball, the structural integrity of the offense collapses. That is not a matter of opinion. It is what the scoreboard reflected. Precisely and immediately, Portland did not generate that run through extraordinary individual performances. They generated it through defensive pressure applied to a depleted Indiana lineup that lacked the personnel to handle it. The expansion franchise, populated with players who had been cut, overlooked, or released across the league, recognized the personnel disadvantage and attacked it directly. Portland's dominance continued through the second quarter, with a three-pointer from Sarah Ashley Barker pushing the lead to 44-26 with 4 minutes remaining before halftime. The Fire led 50-37 at the break. ESPN Indiana never recovered. That is the structural context. The broader context is what has made this game a subject of sustained, pointed criticism from viewers. Criticism that extends beyond a single loss and reflects a pattern of decision-making that the Fever's fanbase has been documenting throughout the early weeks of the 2026 season. The volume and consistency of viewer reaction following this game was notable not for its emotion, but for its specificity. Fans were not expressing general dissatisfaction with the team's record. They were identifying concrete tactical failures: the absence of design plays for Clark, the failure to set screens on her behalf, the preference for isolation basketball featuring perimeter players with low efficiency, and the apparent philosophical decision to distribute touches across the roster in a manner disconnected from what the game situation required. Comments describing the situation as coaching malpractice appeared with enough regularity to suggest they weren't reactive but considered. The specific phrase, malpractice, carries a meaning distinct from mere frustration. It implies a standard of professional competence that viewers believe has been violated repeatedly in decisions that prioritize something other than winning basketball games. Some viewers went further, characterizing the franchise's internal culture as one shaped by self-interest rather than competitive focus. The suggestion, stated plainly in multiple comments, was that decision-makers within the organization were operating with motivations that ran counter to Clark's development and the team's on-court success. That is a significant allegation. It is one that cannot be verified from box scores alone. But the allegation exists, and it is being made by people who watch every game. What can be verified is the on-court record. Over her two most recent games at the time of the Portland loss, Clark had shot a combined 4 for 19 from the field, a 21% clip that represented the worst two-game shooting stretch of her career, according to ESPN research. That statistic reflects individual performance, and Clark acknowledged as much post-game. She noted that foul trouble had affected her in the second half and said she needed to do a better job staying in front of defenders. She accepted responsibility for her own struggles. ESPN, but individual shooting efficiency is not the only variable at stake in a professional basketball game, and the way a coaching staff structures an offense around a primary playmaker has a documented effect on that player's performance. When a point guard spends extended stretches of a game stationed in the corner without the ball, while teammates run isolation sets against collapsing defenses, the rhythm required for consistent shooting, the movement, the reads, the timing, deteriorates. Clark was not missing shots because of individual deficiencies on May 30th. She was missing shots in circumstances where the structural support required for a ball-dominant guard to succeed was absent. The numbers that illustrate this most directly are not Clark's individual totals. They are the team's collective offensive performance. Once Portland identified the press as an effective weapon and deployed it with consistency, rather than designing action to attack the press. Using Clark's decision-making ability to advance the ball against the trap, spreading the floor to create driving lanes, drawing fouls on aggressive help defenders. The Fever bench's apparent response was to remove Clark from those responsibilities entirely. Role players and frontcourt players with limited ball handling experience were tasked with navigating full-court pressure. The predictable result was turnovers, violations, and defensive transition buckets for Portland. The lead that Indiana had built in the opening minutes, and that the team had closed to manageable margins at points, was not lost in a single sequence. It was surrendered systematically over multiple possessions through decision-making that bore no relationship to the personnel advantages Indiana actually held. Clark finished the game with 6 points on 1 for 7 shooting, along with 2 rebounds, 6 assists, and a steal in 22 minutes. The assist total is the detail that viewers kept returning to in the comment section. Even in a game defined by foul trouble and limited minutes, Clark was generating 6 opportunities for teammates. The conversion rate on those opportunities was low. Missed layups at the rim, contested mid-range attempts that could have been declined in favor of continuing ball movement, and forced isolation attempts that ignored open teammates. These were not Clark's failures. They were the failures of an offense that had no coherent architecture. Pro Football Network viewer observations about missed layups require careful framing. The assertion, made in several comments, that players were missing layups intentionally is a characterization that cannot be confirmed. What can be confirmed is that Indiana shot inefficiently from high percentage areas in this game, that the Fever as a unit have struggled to finish at the rim throughout the early 2026 season, and that this pattern has generated skepticism among the team's most engaged viewers about the level of collective investment in winning. Whether that skepticism is justified or whether it reflects frustration that has attached itself to the wrong explanation, the perception is real and it is shaping how the fan base evaluates what it watches. After the game, White defended the early substitution, describing it as standard workload management, and pushed back against the characterization that a routine coaching decision had driven the loss. When the sideline exchange between White and Clark was raised in post-game questioning, White stated plainly, "What happened in that moment is I was challenging a player. It's coaching, is what it is." Bleacher Report Fox News Clark's response to the same question was direct. Asked what had prompted her visible frustration, she gave a short answer. The team was down 20 points. She did not assign blame to coaching. She did not characterize the situation as anything beyond a competitive player's reaction to losing badly on the road. Fox News analyst Jason Whitlock offered a sharply different characterization, posting publicly that White and defensive assistant Brian January had, in his view, sabotaged Clark through the early substitution and the broader management of the game. Whitlock's framing was disputed. Other analysts pointed to the early stage of the season, just 8 games in, and the broader context of White's coaching record, including an underdog semifinal run with Indiana the prior season. Pro Football Network Bleacher Report the debate that followed reflected a genuine division in how observers are reading the Fever's early 2026 season. On one side, a coaching staff navigating a complex roster, managing a returning star's workload and foul propensity, and working through the early season instability that affects every team in the first 8 games. On the other, a pattern of tactical decisions that consistently reduces the effectiveness of Indiana's most valuable player, accompanied by a public posture that has been read by many fans as dismissive of Clark's individual contributions. That tension had been visible 2 weeks earlier as well, when Clark scored 32 points against Washington, including 5 three-pointers in the fourth quarter and a game-tying shot with 7 seconds remaining to force overtime, and White's post-game comments were perceived by a significant segment of the fan base as understating Clark's performance. Social media reaction was extensive and pointed, with fans directly accusing White of downplaying a 17-point fourth-quarter effort in a game Indiana had been on the verge of losing. Fox News White supporters argued that her post-game comment was coach speak, the kind of deflection toward team performance that any coach would offer after a hard-won game. That argument has merit in isolation. In context, following the Portland loss, the early first-quarter substitution, the sideline exchange, and now the ongoing debate about offensive design, the individual incidents are no longer being evaluated in isolation. They are being read as a pattern. That reading may be unfair to a coach who has one semifinal run on her resume with this organization and who is managing real personnel constraints that don't appear fully in any single game recap. Foul trouble is a legitimate complication. Roster depth decisions involve variables that broadcast cameras don't capture. The argument that coaching the Fever, given the weight of expectations surrounding Clark, represents a structurally difficult job is not a dismissal. It is accurate, but difficulty does not preclude accountability. The Fever are 4-4. They have lost to an expansion franchise that entered the game having won 4 of its last 5. The game in Portland was a sellout, 19,347 at the Moda Center. The audience for women's basketball, built in significant part on Clark's arrival in the league, is watching. And what they watched on May 30th was a team that entered with a talent advantage and exited with a 16-point deficit, having failed to design its offense around the player best equipped to attack the defenses they faced. Bleacher Report CBS Sports The Viewer response was not primarily about the loss. Losing to Portland, while disappointing, is something a 4-4 team can absorb. The response was about what the loss revealed, specifically, about whether the people responsible for game planning and in-game adjustments are making decisions oriented toward winning or toward something else. The comment section following this video reflected a fan base that has moved past arguing about individual performances and begun asking structural questions about the organization. The coaching staff and its relationship with Clark is now the central subject. The question of whether designed plays are being drawn up for Clark, whether screens are being set to create looks for her, and whether the offense is being structured to leverage what she does better than any other player in the WNBA. Those questions are being asked with increasing directness, and the answers visible on game film are generating the frustration the comment section reflects. The Fever are 2-3 without Clark in the lineup this season. The suggestion made by at least one national analyst that Indiana is more effective when Clark is not on the floor has been tested against results and found to be unsupported. The team loses without her. It also, on evidence from Portland, failed to win with her, in circumstances where the tactical decisions made during the game systematically reduced her ability to affect the outcome. Fox News, the combination of those two facts is what the fan base is responding to. Not Clark's shooting percentage, not her foul total, not any single moment in the sideline exchange. The broader question of whether the organization around her is structured to help her succeed, or whether the dysfunction visible in individual games reflects something more embedded in how this franchise operates. That question does not have a clean answer after 8 games. What it has is a record, 4 wins, 4 losses, and a growing body of evidence, game by game, decision by decision, that the gap between what this team is capable of and what it is actually producing is not primarily a talent gap. It is a management gap, and the viewers who have been watching every minute of this season, who are filling comment sections with documented, specific criticism, are reaching that conclusion not from rumor or speculation, but from what they see on the floor.